If you're as chronically online as me, you've been seeing these Jet2 holiday memes where people play the sound of an advertisement for I think it's an Australian cruise line company or something like that. I've been seeing those with all these hilarious videos of people's experiences on cruises. Sometimes things go wrong, sometimes crazy things happen, as everybody knows. But I've been thinking about all the crazy birding things that happen on these cruise ships. If you think about it, these are basically man-made islands that go out into the middle of the ocean. If you're a bird, those things see these ships and they think, I got to go check that out. So we are going to talk about some crazy birding experiences that have happened on cruise ships, and some world record-breaking activity that our own Caleb Putnam got up to in 2022. But before we do, let's get into our bird quiz. Last week, we played for y'all the song or call of a spotted sandpiper, and Tim Cornish got that right. Good job, Tim. I think you're at the top of the leaderboards now.
Tim, at it again. I tell you what, we should get some new blood in there too. The rest of you listeners, pipe up, chime in here. Let's go.
Yeah, that's right. This week, we're going to play for you the song or call of a North American bird, and you are going to guess what that bird is for a chance of a shout out at the beginning of next week's episode. All right. All right, you Michigan birders may not know this one, so you might have to do some digging. But without further ado, let's get into it. Caleb, how are we doing, buddy?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. Weather cooled down here. I know I always talk about the weather a lot, so I have to be happy for once that it went down to like 70 degrees, and I was like letting all the cold air in, and really it revived my interest in going outdoors. How about you?
Yeah. The weather has not cooled down here, and I am let's just say I would love a vacation right now. There's maybe some vacation coming up on the horizon, but for now I'm thinking about what it would be like to be on a tropical cruise ship right now.
And that would cool the weather down for you?
Well, at least I would have a pina colada,
There you go. Yeah, I'll take that too. I'll join you if you do it.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd get the conversation started, Will, on the tack that you were talking about earlier with a surprise video that I didn't actually tell you about. So have a look at this and let's talk about it.
Okay.
This is a cruise ship out of Tampa last October, and this was posted by a non-birder who was walking around the top deck of a cruise ship at night in late October off of Florida. And you can see that there are dead and dying birds everywhere. The sky is filled with what looks like moths in the light, and it is all migrating birds that are circling the ship and confused. And there's a least bittern right there. I don't know if you caught that at the last second. So that one looks like maybe a Tennessee warbler, perhaps. And then if you look carefully, Will, this macabre, sinister scene, which it is quite sinister, unfortunately, right there. Look in the middle of your screen, standing in the blue right here. That is a least bittern in the middle of the ocean, confused and bewildered. Will, are you aware of this phenomenon? I'm sure you are.
Absolutely. And I think anybody who's vaguely into birds will have seen these videos pop up on their Facebook or TikTok or Instagram reels. I don't know about you, but to me, I have birding dreams all the time where it becomes incredulous, where I see a rare bird and then another rare bird and then thousands of another bird. And I realize, oh, I'm probably dreaming because that's not really feasible. Doesn't this remind you of a birding dream?
Absolutely. And it goes between being a good dream and a bad dream, right? Because if you're seeing all these rare birds at once, it's like the best birding day of your life. But if they're dead and dying and, being confused and bewildered by a ship that's interrupting their migration like this, it takes on a more sinister thing. But, I think it's important for us to just have awareness of what these animals are going through, especially as we've talked about the 3 billion bird decline. We do care about these populations, and we want to be stewards of the environment and of the species that we have, and caretake them. And just being aware of the things that we do that confuse them and cause problems is really the first step in it. So you want to tell the listeners why that happened and what was going on there?
Yeah, so fundamentally, it's a couple of things, and there could be different reasons for different species or even for different individual birds. Number one, I'll say that if you're a bird that is migrating over the Gulf of Mexico or over the Caribbean Ocean, a huge portion of those birds run out of juice and they fall into the sea. I mean, this happens. It's a huge mortality event. It's dangerous to undergo migration. So some of these birds may have seen this ship and it could have been a godsend because they can probably not get food, but they can rest on that ship until maybe the weather's better, or just take a few hours to rest before they continue the rest of their migration. But for the vast majority of these birds, it's actually a more sinister situation. Birds use lights in the night sky, stars and the moon, probably actually less so the moon, but they use stars to orient themselves north and south. And when the lights from cities, or in this case, artificial light from a ship, are present, it confuses them, and it makes it impossible for them to orient themselves.
Yeah, they're drawn to the light specifically. And what I've learned over the years, partially by experience and paying attention at communications towers, is that what the bird does is similar to a moth. It actually flies right down into the light. And I think some of them collide with the light or the bulb itself. And if not, they circle it endlessly until they collide with either another bird or a wire or part of the building or the ship stack in this case. Now, not all of them die. And the other question is, why are there so many of them at once? And that's because birds do not migrate the same numbers on every single night. And so it's on those nights where you have the right weather conditions. Say in the fall, it might be north winds. And if you have a week of south winds that time of year, they don't migrate, they wait. So, you've got tons of birds ready to go. North winds break, they all go on the same night. And it's on those nights when videos like this are recorded. So the sky is full of perhaps millions of individual birds. Many nights it is millions, especially in the fall. They all fly into the light, circle, and you might find hundreds or thousands of them dead on the ship, but maybe another 80% of what was there did not die. They just got confused, but then when the sun came up, they flew off. So if the ship is there during the daytime, they might land on it for, like you said, a little rest or reprieve. But if it's there during the nighttime, that's when they're actively flying around, and they get extremely confused, and you end up with big problems. Now, all the ship would have had to have done was shut the lights off, and all the birds would have immediately dispersed. We know this, but it's not policy, and the public isn't aware of it. The ship's captains are not aware of it. The employees on that ship were telling the people they've never seen anything like it. They don't know anything about it. So although the fix would be easy from a scientific standpoint, getting people to actually do that and shut the lights off of skyscrapers and communications towers and any kind of tall lit structures in the night sky is a whole other issue and much, much more difficult.
Yeah, it is one of the simplest ways to prevent unnecessary bird death and prevent population decline. Let's get into something a little bit more upbeat, birding that is a little bit more guilt-free that you can do from cruise ships. A lot of people will be aware that birders, especially extreme birders, like to go out on these pelagic trips. So if you can get out on a boat and get off to the continental shelf, you can see bird species that can't be seen from shore usually. Now, if you take this to an even more extreme level, our own Caleb Putnam a few years ago in 2022 decided to go on a repositioning cruise, which means, actually, I'll let you take over and explain what a repo cruise is.
Yeah, well, you can go on a traditional cruise, and it's a kind of a two-way thing, right? You head out from the one port and you come back to the same port, but twice a year, the cruise ship companies will reposition the ship from a southern port to a northern port, and then back in the fall from a northern port to a southern port. So you get a one-way cruise. So you have to book a flight into, in this case, it was San Diego, and then you book a flight home from Vancouver, British Columbia, and you end up with kind of a triangular trip. And lo and behold, we had been eyeballing this trip because people knew that it was going to be like 60 miles offshore, where the water gets deeper and there's a whole different set of birds out there than there are near shore, like the pterodroma petrels of the Pacific, like Murphys and Cooks. Those things start to come into play. Short-tailed albatross ticks up. So a group of friends and I signed up for the cruise, and when we showed up, little did we know that the famous Tom Johnson was there. He was on the cruise, as was a whole assemblage of other really well-known birders, Ross and Melissa Gillardi, Doug Gotchfeld, Marky Mutchler, and that was kind of tip of the iceberg. There was a bunch of them, and I'll tell you what, it was one of the greatest ocean birding trips I've had, and one of the greatest birding experiences, because you are standing on deck. And I'll share some of the photos here so you can see what this was like. So, Will, this is a full-size cruise ship. This is from Tom Johnson's blog, or actually from Ross and Melissa Gillardi's budgetbirders.com. Great people, really nice, and absolute rock stars in world travel and birding. Definitely check them out. Ross discovered a species of bird new to science in a remote African mountain range. I don't even remember what country or what the species was. and he regaled me in person with that story, and it was unbelievable. We should totally have him on this podcast at some point. Him and his wife Melissa, they're unbelievable.
That'd be great.
So yeah, I show up, and the first thing is Paul Lehman, this famous North American birder, is kind of running the show. He's got everything organized. Really nice guy. Really, really expert, legendary birder. He's like authored and and edited tons of these field guides that have gone out over the years. Really interesting guy. He knows all about this stuff. And so we kind of arranged a trip, and then we had to find a place to stand. And I was expecting that they would have chosen a boat where we could stand on the front and kind of look both right and left side of the boat. But a lot of these cruise ships don't have any deck where you can do that. And that includes this one. So we ended up having to choose right, starboard, or port. And I think we chose port in the final analysis. We were kind of looking westward as we went north. And basically, it was like 30 of us that would just start as soon as the sun came up, and we'd stand here on deck. And it's incredible because there's humongous waves. You'd never be able to have a spotting scope out there unless you were on a boat this large. And so you end up being able to scan all the way out to the horizon really effectively out of the wind. The boat cancels out the waves for the most part, just to kind of a low rocking motion. And then you're sitting here chilling with, some of the most legendary birders in the world. These are actually my photos here. So that's Paul Lehman there, Ross Gallardi, Nathan Goldberg from Chicago, Doug Gotchfeld. And then here in the green hat is Tom Johnson, definitely one of the most famous birders that we've ever had. Tom Johnson here. Melissa Roach, his fiance, and I'm sure all or most of the listeners know that unfortunately about a year after this experience, we got the horrible news that Tom had passed away at age 35. And I must say I was very shocked by this and very upset. And it really put a new perspective on being able to be on this trip and have interacted with him the way that I was able to, because we got a lot of kind of quality time and just talking birds. And, I was able to see in person how awesome of a birder the guy was. And he was a really nice guy too. Like he had gotten into the mirrorless cameras at that time. And he had the new, I think it was the R6 or R5 body with the Canon 1:5 and the 2-time extender. And I had never had any experience with that. I was still, and I still am in the dark ages now with my 7D Mark II and my 1:4, the trusty DSLR. And he knew I was curious, and he just walked up and just handed me his rig and said, "Why don't you just shoot this for like 15-20 minutes and then give it back to me whenever you're done." And he's a really nice guy.
That's cool.
So it was extremely sad to end up with that news. In terms of the birds, a whole bunch of very interesting things were going on. Let's just I'm just going to kind of spew these, Will, because there was so much going on. So one of the first things that happened is that adult long-tailed Jaegers and adult Savins gulls were everywhere. And this was April 20th to 23rd, something like that, of 2022. So the time of year, and this is like 60 miles offshore. I don't see adult long-tailed Jaegers in breeding plumage. I don't see adult Savins. In fact, I don't think I had ever seen an adult Savins gull prior to this trip. And they were just all over the place. It just got to the point where they were so routine, we weren't even calling them out anymore, which it's just absolutely surreal. This was another cool thing that happened. There was a red-necked phalarope walking around on board the ship one of the mornings we woke up.
What?
Red-necked. Oh, it was crazy. And the birds, I think it was okay after we let it go, but you can see the lobe-shaped feet there, kind of like coot-looking toes, because they're swimming and twirling all the time in the water.
Is that a male or female?
That would be the female. Yeah, they're really brightly colored with sharp orange patterning and whatnot. But I mean, spectacular bird. And I just happened to wake up early enough to see it because I think he released it like 15 minutes after the sun came up.
And phalaropes are some of the only birds in the world that have reverse sexual dimorphism. So the females not only are colored and patterned more vibrantly, but they actually act more sexually aggressive on the breeding grounds, and the males are more submissive. So the males actually get to be more choosy with their mates. It's a total reversal of almost the entirety of the rest of the animal kingdom.
Yeah, polyandry, meaning many males for one female. It's a bizarre situation. That's another thing, but people haven't been on cruises before. It's an amazing way to bird because the food you're eating is just absolute luxury. The problem became all day long. They've got like really good coffee. You can get food anytime you want, like really deluxe. The problem is nobody is ever willing to leave the deck, because the instant you spend 5 minutes running to the cafeteria and back might be the only time that short-tailed albatross is seen on the whole trip, right? And we did not get short-tailed albatross, as it turns out. We were looking every single distant albatross. We were checking that beak color for that big pink beak of short-tailed, but they were all black, which is the black-footed albatross, the more common one.
Well, you probably missed it when you all went to dinner, right?
Never happened. I'm telling you, I swear, Will, we were on deck from the time the sun came up to the time the sun went down, and it was exhausting. I can tell you that. But we stayed there. A few of the people would put down and sleep. I have photos of it. I won't subject any of my friends to that, but and I will actually, this is another thing I have to credit Tom Johnson with. His perseverance and his energy level. He was the one that would not stop. And he, even when all the rest of us were getting tired and getting eye strain and just dozing, he was sitting there the whole time scanning till the sun went down. He was the last one off the deck. This is the other thing that was really fun about this trip is he and Doug Gotchfeld were kind of really obsessively doing the eBird pelagic protocol, which I think was like maybe 10-mile chunks. I forget the specifics, but basically every time you hit the 10-mile mark, you have to stop and do exact counts or estimates. And I think they were clicking too. And there were so many birds out there. It was a chore. And I think they put together, it had to be 80 checklists over a 3-day period or something like that. I mean, it was a phenomenal amount of work.
That's amazing, because it's so rare to get that kind of data, and it's really important to have people following similar protocols. Otherwise, you can't really compare. If you're trying to look at population dynamics or anything like that over time, really well thought out and followed protocol is incredibly important for that.
Yeah, otherwise you have apples and oranges data, right? And it's still valuable. It's just not apples and apples is way more valuable.
Right.
So that was really cool. Now let's get into the species that we saw. These are some of the photos that the Gallardis put up. I think I got 3 lifers on this trip, and this was one of them. This is the Cook's petrel. Seabird identification is really difficult. You get into a lot of kind of like minutia of plumage patterns, a lot of gray and kind of dark gray birds with patches of black, maybe patches of white underneath. But one of the things that really jumped out at you when you're out here is the behavioral patterns, because you wouldn't even have to see the color of a bird when you can see the exact way that it's behaving. And Tom and everybody was just teaching the entire time. They were calling out these field marks the whole time. But Cook's petrel is a smaller bird than some of these other petrels. And their flight style was very agile and kind of acrobatic almost. So lots of sudden quick movements. They were just always buffeting and moving around quickly. And you didn't get those vibes from some of the other species.
Very typical for smaller birds.
Yeah. And then the one that really took the cake here, and we'll get into numbers there in a second, but this is the Murphy's petrel. And I was under the impression that we might see, I don't know, a few of them in a day. And we ended up seeing over 500 in a 3-day period and setting the North American all-time record for a single trip. And we didn't just set it by a little bit. We it was like quadruple of the previous record, or 5 times or something. It was this bird. Wow. When we first saw it, we were all flipping and going crazy. It became something that you were looking through to look for others very quickly. And I couldn't even now saying that, I'm like, what is happening right now? I would never call it a trash bird, but it just got to the point where there was so many of them. We were like, okay, another Murphy's, and just move,
So here's my question. Did people expect that? Like, did Tom Johnson and the other very experienced West Coast pelagic birders, did they anticipate that it would become a near trash bird, or were they also shocked?
I don't think that they knew what to expect. I don't think they were terribly surprised that we set a record, but the problem with seabirds is they really do move around the ocean in unpredictable patterns, and you don't know in any given day where they're going to be, or like where the concentrations are going to be. And it was very clear that we ended up in a really high concentration of them. We don't know why. Maybe it was perfect timing. Maybe there was food things, and there's been all kinds of La Nina and El Nino events that drastically changes the patterns in the ocean. I don't really know. I was going to tell you, the flight style for Murphy's was very interesting too. They did a lot. So first of all, it's a brown bird, and it almost gives you like a turkey vulture sheen on the underwing. You get this white silver lining in the flight feathers with dark coverts like turkey vulture. And you
Yeah.
get a little bit of white around the face, that petrel beak. And this was a bigger bird, maybe it was bigger than Cook's petrel, but still smaller than like ring-billed gull. From above, you get a little bit of that kind of, I don't know, triangle wing thing, like a gray triangle on the back. Fairly nondescript bird. There's not a lot going on with them, but they would do these awesome high arcs where they would get up and turn almost like vertical like this. And here's a perfect example. It would be down here, and all of a sudden it would go whoop, all the way up like this and then end up like vertical. And that behavior, even from a big distance, you're just like, that's a Murphy's petrel. You could get nothing on plumage. So it was fascinating how quickly you learn these things when you've got in-person field experience with people like Tom Johnson.
Maybe you can help me explain this to our listeners, but this behavior is called shear watering. It's a flight style, and basically all of the tube noses do it, and it's their hack for how they can cover massive distances without ever flapping their wings, and it's a total feat of nature. I've heard it compared to, how raptors have figured out how to kettle to use rising air currents so that they don't have to expend energy covering long distances. This is their answer to that in areas where there aren't a ton of huge updrafts. They've figured out that they can keep their wings straight, and just by shifting very slightly, they can use a little boost from a wave to get height, and then use that height to cover a distance and then come back down. So it's this really extremely energy efficient thing. And that's important because these are big, heavy birds with very long wings. If they had to constantly be flapping, they wouldn't be ever able to cover tens of thousands of miles every single year, which is what all of these species do. It's amazing.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. They would not be able to do what they do without this practice. And the name that I've always heard is dynamic soaring. And so this is a perfect illustration here. So there's friction with the air is moving across the water, and at the level of the water, the wind is slowed down. So the moral of the story is the higher above the water you get, the wind speed picks up. So the bird will cut into the headwind low, and then it will do what I was telling you with Murphy's, where it'll just go straight up in the air, sometimes as high as maybe 50 to 100 feet up. And then that faster wind begins to propel them in the opposite direction. And at the top of it, they'll turn out of it and glide downwind at really high speed. And that's when they can cover like a quarter mile, a half mile before they glide back down to the water level. And then they can cut back into the wind and then go straight up again. And they never have to flap. So that was certainly what was going on, as we were watching.
Notably, they don't also necessarily have to go exactly with the direction of the wind. Part of the magic of this is that they can sort of use that the wind to get height really quickly, and then they can soar down perpendicular to the wind, or sometimes even slightly against the wind. So it's almost more like how like a pirate ship works, or a huge sail ship, where they
a sailboat. Yeah.
It's an amazing feat. Anyways, I didn't want to derail our breakdown of the different species that you saw.
No, to the contrary. That is a factor that if the birds weren't doing it, these seabirds wouldn't be able to exist. Because again, Murphy's petrel and Cook's, I believe, are both breeding in New Zealand, and they're spending their non-breeding season in the Western Pacific waters off of California and Oregon. And the reason that they're doing it, actually, I'll pull up a map and we can do this. This is a good conversation. Cook's and Murphy's petrels are breeding on islands in the area of New Zealand here in the austral summer, which is the northern winter, of course, right? And so when you get to April is about the last month or so where they're going to stay in the north and get ready to return to New Zealand. So the fact you're like, why do they fly all the way across the Pacific and end up in California? That seems very oddly specific, and there's a very good reason for this. Most of the ocean has very little food, and the place where you get the food is where deep cold water is pushed upward into warm surface water by the orography, or the shape of the bottom. So if you look carefully here, that you can see that the water depth off, this is Southern California, it's very deep out here, like something like maybe 50 miles offshore, 30 miles, but it gets much shallower as you come in here. And so that creates a cold water upwelling. And when you get to Monterey, this upwelling is occurring visible from shore here. And so this Monterey Bay is world famous because you can see like a million shearwaters like a mile offshore. It's especially sooty and short-tailed shearwaters in season. You notice that the Pacific is deep near shore almost this entire way, and we were 60 miles offshore at times, maybe even 80 miles, which puts you out into the deep water, and that's why you get Murphys and some of these other species. They don't like to be over that shelf as much. So there's a specific reason that these birds spend as much time in California as they do in New Zealand over the course of a year. Now, let's talk about albatrosses. Okay, so there's two species of albatrosses that are occurring here, and the common one is this black-footed, and these, like the other rare one that's called Laysan albatross, these nest in Central Pacific tropical islands, specifically Hawaii and the chain of islands coming off the northwestern end of Hawaii, leading to like Laysan Island and Midway Atoll. So black-footed was very common. You can recognize them. They're completely dark, a little bit of white near the face, and their movements, because they're so gigantic, are much slower than the smaller shearwaters and petrels and so on. So just kind of the slow lumbering movements will tell you, even at a great distance, that you're seeing one. The Laysan albatross is a white-bodied bird. It almost has the color pattern of a gull, or closer to a gull, and they're considerably less common, much less numerous in kind of California waters. So let's talk about totals here, Will. We had over 500 Murphy's petrels over a 3-day period. We had over 150 Cook's petrels, and that was also some kind of record where we blew it out of the water. I don't think the previous was, it might have been a little more than half of that. I mean, we already knew we had broken the record like midway through the trip.
Wow.
And then 20 Laysan albatrosses, which I think the previous record might have been below 10, something like that. I don't have the numbers handy. And then one other species that we haven't talked about yet is this Hawaiian petrel. Now, we had expected that we might even miss this one, and we ended up getting 7 different ones. So it was a little bit of a surprise, a very happy surprise.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that much confidence in my own abilities, but I was very happy that one of the 7 individuals, I was the one that first got on it on the horizon, because with a slate of birders that talented, they're pretty much picking up on everything before everybody else, right?
It's always fun.
Yeah, I felt good to realize that I was able to kind of learn these things that fast. And what you get with them is they're much more kind of jet black looking above, with a really sharply demarcated white face. And then from underneath, they're extremely white, but with a tiny strip of that kind of ulnar bar that you get on like black-cap petrel and some of these other petrels. But so they're sharply black above, sharply white below, and they're very agile, and they like slice through the air and waves like a hot knife through butter. I mean, dude, it's breathtaking. I don't know how many seabirds you've seen, but these animals are living in the craziest of conditions. A human would succumb in minutes if you were in the water or had to deal with anything. Even if you had a boat, and you didn't have supplies and rescue, you'd be done so fast. These animals are just as chill as can be out there, living their lives, slicing around. They're so athletic. They're so tough. And it was like super inspiring to watch, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. If I'm not wrong, some tube noses are the birds that have been seen literally at the North Pole. They are braving the most insane conditions of any birds out there. It would be like humans living alone in the Saharan desert or something, you know?
Yep.
Just in a sand dune. I know that people do live in very crazy conditions too, but these birds just have themselves, you know?
It just amazes me how little they are intimidated or even think about it. I mean, they're just out there in these extreme winds. It's quite cold, and there's not food for 1,000 miles in any direction in some cases, right? When they're crossing from Hawaii to get over here. But that's what these albatrosses are. Laysan albatross will leave the nest and fly. They put a transmitter on the back of it. It had a chick sitting on Laysan Island. And then they thought, well, what does it fly? Like 50 miles out and then come back, or 100 miles maybe? And the answer was like 1,200 miles one way. Grabs a bunch of fish in Alaska, and then it turns around and flies 1,200 miles back with the fish in its crop and feeds those to its chick. And then it goes out for another 3-day, and it just keeps doing this for these 3-day loops, collecting food from like 1,000 miles away for these chicks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an unbelievable feat.
It's flying like 1/10 of the circumference around the world weekly, twice, to feed its chicks. Yeah, talk about motherly love.
and barely flapping. That's the other thing. They're not hardly expending any energy to do so, you know?
That's right. Well, Caleb, should we wrap this up here? Are there any other major numbers that we should hit?
No, those are the big ones. You will say that when you're doing trips like this, the list of species that you can get is not humongous. It is a limited pool of species, but there are some really high quality ones. You know, and anytime I can get 3 or 4 lifers in one trip in mainland lower 48, you know what I mean, is an accomplishment. So it was very magical.
Yeah,
One thing we ought to do, let's look through the species list before we finish here.
for sure.
And this will give folks these trip reports. We'll put this in the show notes here. So these eBird trip reports are really powerful and highly recommend people do it. We left from San Diego and pretty much immediately the sun went down. And what I noticed in these first couple checklists here offshore is that there was a lot of black storm petrels, it was a cool bird in its own right, way bigger than normal storm petrels. But once you get away from those breeding islands that time of year, you don't really see them. They're each of those species is really concentrated in a relatively small area around the islands that they breed on. And in the case of black storm petrel, I think they're a little bit more near to the shore. So then the sun goes down, right? And that's when the ship was in this area. So that's day 1, 60 to 80 miles offshore. We tried to get ashy storm petrel, which is the only lifer that I could have gotten that I missed. And what ended up happening is we did not get to the breeding colony area, which is the Farallon Islands offshore of San Francisco here until the sun was going down. And the waves were really, really large in that 2-hour period. And a couple people saw like one of them. And I ran right to their shoulder when they called it out. I'm like, where? And I tried so hard, but I couldn't find one. And you just don't get them, you know, anywhere else along the trip. Day 2, we kind of went from Oregon into Washington waters. And I think it was day 3. We woke up and we were in the Strait of Juan de Fuca and then kind of finished here. So it was really cool from shore as we were leaving. You know, we're getting like wimbrels, there were like long-billed curlews, things like red phalaropes. There was just hundreds and hundreds of them when you're way offshore. Those are birds that wintered in the southern oceans and are heading to the Arctic, right? And they live their whole life on the ocean until they get to the tundra. So if you want to see them, you got to get offshore in the ocean. Adult long-tailed Jaegers up the wazoo. We did get all 3, but not many of the others. Of course, you got to talk about merlets and, you know, auklets and tufted puffins, all that kind of stuff. So we even were able to get Scripps merlet from shore, or not from shore, but from the near shore checklist as we were leaving San Diego. That was super cool. Flocks of Sabin's gulls. We had a few Arctic terns too, which was really nice. That's another one that's out in the ocean for most of its life until it goes to the high Arctic tundra.
Yeah.
And then, here's your seabird totals: 585 fork-tailed storm petrels, 87 black-footed, 22 laysan, which I believe is one of the records. When you got to the northern part of this, you're getting the Leach's storm petrels, so they were in the hundreds. These were all in California. 569 Murphy's petrel was an all-time record. 7 to 8, I thought it was 7, but they must have had an 8th one when people weren't all on deck. And 164 cooks, a couple of other species. Dude, it was an amazing experience, and I'm just really happy to have had the time with Tom Johnson, you know, and to have been a part of that. It's kind of like you grow up with hearing about Roger Tory Peterson and the Ken Kaufmans and the Ted Parkers and these types of people. Tom is one of them, and it's not every day in your life or career that you get to spend a bunch of time with somebody. So, you know, rest in peace, Tom. We're all going to miss you. That's for dang sure.
Absolutely. And if you listen to the ABA podcast with Nate Swick, he closes out every episode by saying bird like Tom. And that means not only with the skill and diligence of Tom, but also with the sort of compassion and kindness, not only for birds, but for people. I know that's how I try to do it. And I think you do too. So, yeah.
I think it's all about sharing. And I don't know, I didn't know Tom that well, but from everything that I can see about him, he wanted to teach as many people as much as he could. And he was a giver. He was a sharing person. And I think he saw that the education and inspiring people with the passion that you have on your inside is what it's all about. And that's really why the podcast exists, Will, right? I mean, that's why we do this. So
for sure.
You know, huge inspiration and real pleasure and great life experience for me.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this week's episode of the Real Birding Podcast. We really appreciate it. Sorry for this week's delay in the episode, and we'll be back next week with another fun episode about birds and birding. Go out there and see some birds this week. And if you have any questions about how to plan a sort of repo cruise that Caleb went on in 2022, hit us up in the comments, and maybe we'll see if we can even throw together a fun birding community trip in the coming years for the real birding fans here. So that would be amazing.
I like the sounds of that, Will. You are speaking my language.
Absolutely.
Let us know if you have any interest, everybody, and get out there and see some southbound shorebirds and enjoy that little bit cooler weather if you're up here in the north like us. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.
Peace.